I thought today it would be fitting if I talked to you a little bit about basically the process behind game design and the things that have worked really well for us at ArenaNet in hopes that you guys can take some of these lessons. And if you go forth and you make games, you have this knowledge as something that could help you as well. I think especially in this age where lots of people are able to make games much easier than they ever were before. I think times are changing where anyone in this room could be making a video game. A few months ago, I met the guys who made FTL, Faster Than Light. And hopefully some of you guys have had a chance to check it out. That was a game made by 2 people, and it is one of the best-selling games of the year. It was nominated for Game of the Year in a lot of game shows worldwide. That's an example where every single one of you has a chance to make that game next. And so it's a cool era for video games when you guys get a chance to really be that involved. So let's talk a little bit about the process of designing video games. So you want to make a video game. The very first thing that you need to do is define the pillars for your game. This is extremely important. It's something that for us at ArenaNet, making Guild Wars 2, made all the difference in the design choices that we made for our game. So what are your pillars? These are the rules for your game. This is basically the guidelines that you're going to use. This sets expectations. It determines who's going to buy your game. So if you decide that one of your pillars is that your game is very hardcore and very difficult and everything should be very hard to overcome, you've just set your target market and said, this small group of people will buy my game who really love hardcore games, but you've just ruled out the entire casual market. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just need to understand who is your target market, who are you trying to target your game towards, and your pillar is going to affect that, or the pillars of your game. And most importantly, for your development team, the pillars provide clarity to your team of what they're doing. It also provides constraints to design within. As a designer, I find the hardest things to design is somebody walks into a room and tells me, design something. I have no idea what to do with that. If they walk in the room and say, design something and I want a level that has stealth in it and it takes 5 minutes and you move through it and you can move through different entrances and I want it to be something where there's different levels of difficulty. That's something where I have constraints and I can work within that. And the pillars, as your place to start, give you constraints to work within. So I want to walk you through the pillars for Guild Wars 2 as a game. And there were some smaller ones than these as well, but these are the really big ones. And one of these pillars specifically is the thing that we're going to talk about today. So community-driven game. This is the most important pillar that Guild Wars 2 is built on. The game encourages players to play together, prevents player conflict, except in PvP, which we were okay with, provides clear, visible benefits for playing with other players in the world, and establishes strong communities. And each of these is very, very important. Throughout the 5 years that we spent building Guild Wars 2, which is a really long time, we went back and looked at these pillars constantly and judged every decision we made against these as often as we possibly could. Action-oriented combat, this is basically combat has movement, is something that's fun to watch. Your character moving around is the important part rather than sort of watching UI elements move up and down. Your character has a story. In Guild Wars 2, you filled out a biography at the beginning of the game that basically determined the story that your character would have in the game, and you had choices you played through, so your character really had a storyline in our game. And the last one is Living World. This one is the world feels alive. It feels like it's a living place. NPCs in the world feel like they actually are doing things. The world feels like there's a sense of realism, and content actually affects the world. And of these, the big two I'm going to talk about today, community-driven game is the primary pillar. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Living World as well. So what do you do with your pillars? You judge every single decision that you make as a designer against them. This is programming, this is designing, this is art. All of these can be affected by your pillars. You need to repeat them constantly so they become ingrained in the minds of your team. Pillars are the blueprint. It's amazing how often when we first started working on the game, people would go off into rooms and start designing ideas, and they would come back and say, we want to do this. And we would say, that doesn't match the pillars of our game. Our game is about community, and putting everybody in separate instances on their own doesn't support what we're trying to accomplish. And the thought was, OK, I get it. And as you start repeating that more and more and more, people start to understand the pillars of your game. And they don't even have to think about it anymore. It becomes second nature over time. Post your pillars in visible places where everyone can see them. Bathroom stalls, walls, anywhere you need to. You just want to have reminders everywhere for people that this is important and that this is the thing they should be thinking about that defines your game. You're going to end up building marketing and PR strategies effectively around your pillars. And this isn't something that you think about when you start making a game. When you start making a game, you start thinking, I want to make this amazing game, and I'm going to love playing it, and people are going to love playing it. And you don't think about 2 years later, you're going to market that game, and you're going to have a PR team that supports that game. And the things that they're going to latch onto, the message that they're going to sell your game on, is based on those pillars. You want to include the pillars in your QA testing process as much as you can. Make sure that your testing team understands the pillars of the game, and give them the leverage where if they see something that doesn't match the pillars, they are allowed to come to you and say, I see something that doesn't work. This doesn't match the pillars of the game. Those people know your game best. The folks who actually are testing it day to day know it even better than the developers, because you spend half your time working on the game. They spend their entire day playing the game all day long. And they're the ones who can help you judge if those things work. So they're a very important part of that process. And the very last thing is change your pillars at your own risk. I'll just say that this is very dangerous to do. You can do it. You could be midway through game development and realize one of the pillars for your game is not going to work, and you can change it. But it's very dangerous because every decision you've made up until a certain point is based on those pillars that you chose. And so if you decide to change them, you could be drastically changing your game, your target audience, and it's very hard to adjust to that midway through game development. So you've defined your pillars, which is the base that your house is built on. The next thing you do is you need to define the features that your game is going to have. This is the minute-to-minute things people are doing in your game. Oops, there we go. So some of the features that Guild Wars 2 has, and you know, when you spend 5 years working on a game, there's a lot of features. So these are just some of them. Persistent world is an open shared world between players. For those who aren't familiar with MMOs, the concept behind a game like Guild Wars is you take a traditional RPG, a single-player game that you progress through, you gain levels, you do quests, and all your friends can play it with you at the same time. That is what an MMO is all about. In a persistent world, all of your friends can play it with you at the same time, and there are hundreds of other players also running around in one map or multiple maps all together in the world. It's like playing Skyrim with 400 people at the same time in one map. That's the best description I can give if you're not familiar with it. So we're going to talk a lot today about this persistent world feature. The dynamic event system is another one of the major features for Guild Wars 2. And these are events that occurred around the world that players could participate in. We went with a very different quest system for Guild Wars 2. In a traditional quest system, you walk up to a guy, talk to them, they give you a little text blurb that you get to read. You click accept, you go do the quest, you come back and you get a reward. In Guild Wars 2, there really aren't quests. There are events that constantly happen, go away, and they change the world. And the world is filled with these events that are localized to a location. And we'll talk about those more in detail later. That is the other major feature we're going to examine today when discussing pillars and features. Some of the other things we had, personal story. That's the storyline that your specific character has in the world. World versus world PvP. This is open large-scale combat where hundreds of players from different worlds. Competitive PvP. This is small teams of players fighting to be the best PvP players in the world. Dungeons are small dungeon encounters with groups that are more difficult PvE content, and those tend to happen in instances. We had a lot of weapon and profession-based skills, so a lot of the abilities that your character can use were based on if they were a warrior and they were wielding a longbow. That determines the skills that they use, entirely based on the fact that they have a bow. And then we had additional systems that let you customize from there. And a lot of free-form movement, so the ability to jump, the ability to swim, and the ability to really move around in 3D space. These are some of the major features in Guild Wars 2, but we're going to focus today on persistent world and the dynamic event system. So how do you go from deciding your features to aligning them to the pillars? So you want to do this one feature at a time, and you want to start with, let's take this feature and compare it against each one of our pillars. This is an extremely design-heavy process. It's very time-consuming. This is you drawing on whiteboards all day long and everybody talking about what could we do with this feature? How do we want to make it function to fit the pillars of our game? You're going to head down countless paths that don't work, and there is nothing wrong with that. That is part of good game design, is you're going to come up with ideas all the time that seem like a great idea. You start building it, and you start figuring it all out, and you realize this isn't going to work for the game we have, and you start over again. You can't be afraid of that. One of the things that we've started trying to do at ArenaNet is if a team has an idea and they try to build it and it doesn't work out, we want to applaud that. We want to say, congratulations, you guys tried something innovative and unique, and it didn't work. That's okay. we learned that as opposed to being afraid of failing. I think if you don't try different things and you don't go down those paths, you never will be able to make something innovative. And you need to leave time in the schedule to allow for the maximum amount of time to iterate. So for some of you guys, as you get out in the game industry in the future, one of the things that you'll find is you'll have a publisher. And if you're on a game company, a publisher works with you to set the timeline for your game. And so it's always very smart, if you can, to work with your publisher and remind them you would like to have as much time as possible early on in the design phase to iterate and try to get the game figured out before you go into full production. It's very important. So I want to give some examples of this whole pillar feature process from Guild Wars 2 so you guys can really see what I'm talking about. And the major pillar that we're going to focus on today is a community-driven game. So we'll look at the features, the persistent world, and the event system, which is our content delivery system, as the two major features. So we'll start with persistent world as a feature of the game. So what do players expect from a persistent shared world? What sub-features have traditionally defined a persistent world? And how can we innovate on these sub-features while aligning towards your pillar of becoming a community-driven game? So first, we need to look at what makes a persistent world. What are the expectations of players, at minimum, that a game is a persistent world? The first is that players have to be able to play together in the world simultaneously. That's very important. And the second is that players can interact with one another in that world. If we built Skyrim and everyone ran around next to each other and couldn't talk, that would not be. All of them playing together is what makes that persistent. All right, so what are some of the rules that are defined inside of a persistent world? There are rules for looting and killing creatures. So multiple players are playing next to each other. You need to define the rules for how they're allowed to fight against the creatures and get rewards from them. There is level-specific content usually. So the game has levels, and different areas are assigned levels for that content. And that's an important thing for gauging how much people can fight in the area, when they can approach that area, what they can play there. There are rules defining player interaction and how they are allowed to interact together. And there are rules defining the consequences of one player's actions in the world. So let's take a look at each one of those as they relate to the pillar. So we sat down and we started going through each of these sub-rules as we were looking at trying to build Guild Wars 2. And we wanted to find out, do the traditional things that have been done match our pillar of a community-driven game? So we said, traditional rule for killing and looting creatures in an online MMO, where players are all running around together at the same time, is once one person has attacked a creature, they own that creature. They tag it basically for ownership. And if it is owned by that player and another player comes up and helps them kill it, only the person who tagged it gets credit for it. They get the rewards, they get the loot. In some games, if you're in a group with other players, everybody can get credit for it. But any two random people running around next to each other, they can't kill the same creature and get rewards for it. Only one person can. And our pillar is, the game will encourage players to play together, prevent player conflict, provide clear, visible benefits for playing with other players, and establish strong communities. So I'll ask you guys, do you think that that rule fits the pillar of this game? No. I agree, no. So the next step is, how do you figure out what you're going to do to try to fix that, to make that system work with the pillars that you have? So some of the options that we came up with, we decided, let's remove the monster tagging system entirely. Let's just say anyone can attack a creature anytime. What happens if we do that? And let's allow anyone to earn loot if they attack and kill a creature. What happens if we do that? Well, first, it didn't seem like it would be that big of a deal. And second, we needed to look at what rules do we need to create to govern this if we did it. So you need to make rules about earning credit for kills so that people don't run around, they all run up, they shoot one attack at a creature, and then they go running off because they got credit for the creature and that's it. So what we did is we set up damage thresholds for creatures. So you had to do a minimum amount of damage to qualify for the loot and rewards for that creature. So what that means is everybody running around in the world together, they all can run up, they can all attack a creature, as long as they do a minimum amount of damage to it, which is usually set pretty low. All of them can get rewards for it. And now suddenly, we have our players able to play next to each other, and you don't see another player as a problem if you're trying to kill a creature for your quest, or if you want to get the loot from them. They can help you kill that creature faster, and everybody can get the rewards. And it's a really small psychological shift, but fundamentally, another player becomes a benefit instead of somebody preventing you from getting credit for the thing that you're trying to do. So let's look at the next sub-feature, level-specific content. So the traditional rule in an open world game is that each area has levels assigned to it, and all the creatures have levels in those areas. And you need to be close to that level, depending on how good you are as a player, to be able to fight against those creatures. And if you're over that level, it's really easy. And if you're under that level, you basically can't fight that stuff. So we asked the question, does that encourage players to play together? Does it mean everyone can work together? And our answer to that one was sort of. It kind of does. It makes people want to get up to levels that they can all play together in an area. But it doesn't encourage everyone to play together all the time. And we asked ourselves, is there anything that we can do with the game that makes it so instead of people sometimes wanting to play together if they're around the same level in a game, they always can play together no matter what? So the ideas we came up with to solve this, the first one is remove levels from the game entirely. This is a major fundamental shift from what has been done in most role-playing games in the past. And one of the directions we were given was the game needs to have levels in it. I didn't include this in the pillars earlier, but it was one of the sort of high-level concepts behind the game was that we wanted to have a sense of level progression. So we had to leave this one out. It's interesting, though, in retrospect, this would have been a path that we could have gone down with Guild Wars 2 that would have been an even probably larger fundamental shift than what we did. The other option we came up with was to build a system so levels aren't important, but still matter a little bit. And the way we came up with that is we made a dynamic level adjustment system. So if you are higher level than an area and you go back to that area, the game adjusts your level down to the content in that area so that you can experience it. The rewards are adjusted so that you can earn, let's say you're level 50 and you go to a level 10 area. Everything in the level 10 area is a fun fight for you because we adjust your stats down to the level 10 content, but you can still earn rewards as a level 50 character from that area. So you have a reason to want to go there and fight in that area. What it also means is, let's say you have a really high level character in the game and your girlfriend or your boyfriend decides to make a brand new character. That's one of the most frustrating things in the game, right? You have to go make a brand new character and play through the game with them. And then your cousin makes a character, and you got to go make a new character for them. And all of a sudden, you come home at night, and you're like, I just want to play my character, and instead I have to play with all these other people. Well, we wanted to solve that with this system, which is basically you can take your high-level character, and you can go play with anyone you want who has lower-level characters in the game. And it creates an issue, which is how do we motivate people to want to go back to these lower-level areas and play with lower-level friends? And that is where the idea came up that we should give them rewards for their actual level, regardless of where they are in the game. Now, stuff is a little bit easier if you go back from high levels to lower levels. So we don't give you quite as much high-level gear or high-level loot as rewards. But we do it as often as we can to try to keep a good balance there. All right, so the next sub-feature that we needed to look at is what are the rules for players interacting together in a persistent world? So the traditional rules are, when you make a character, you decide, is your character going to live on a role-playing server where players don't fight against each other except in PvP, or on a PvP server where everyone can fight against each other in the open world? Another traditional rule is looting benefits for forming a group. So if you're with a group of other players and you formally group up together, everybody usually can get loot for the creatures you kill or experience. But if you're not in a group with other players and there's just two of you running around in a world, you do not usually get credit for helping each other. There are things like buffs or healing or rezzing other players in these games that are generally time limited or resource limited. So you're not encouraged to use them all the time on other players. You want to save them for important moments. Like you get one resurrection you can use every 15 minutes. So if you run past the corpse of somebody you don't know, you're not going to waste it on them. You're going to save it for something important later. And we asked ourselves, does this pass the test? Does this encourage everybody to play together? Does it prevent conflict? Does it provide clear benefits for playing together? And does it establish strong communities? So I'll ask you guys, do you think these rules do that? No. All right, so what can we do to try to change that? And this was one that's a lot harder. We spent a lot of time coming up with a lot of ideas. We came up with a lot of really bad ideas, and we came up with some that have worked out really well. So one of our first ones is we made the rule that players cannot fight against each other in our core world. Now this is an interesting decision. Because of the pillars of our game of community, this made sense for us. The only place they can fight is if they go to PvP. There are plenty of games where it is okay to fight in the open world, and that works for those games as well. But based on the pillars that we chose for our game, that resulted in us answering this question this way. We need to make it so we reward players for helping one another, regardless of if they know each other or in a group, to help encourage community. And we need to remove all the barriers to shared experiences. So what are the things that we did to help solve that? All players are always working together as a community in our game. And the ways that we accomplish that, everyone in the game can resurrect one another. And they have an unlimited number of resurrections that they can use. So if you find another player in the world that has died, you can literally run up to them, kneel down, and slowly give them back their health, and they can jump back up again. And it's a really interesting small change. And what you see in our game is people are always running around, and if they see the corpse of someone, they run up and res them. It doesn't matter if they know them, doesn't matter if they know them well. You always have these moments where they run up and resurrect each other. And most importantly, we wanted to create rewards for doing that. So you earn experience for saving another player. And suddenly, for incentivizing them for helping others, for rewarding them for doing it, you see this psychological shift in our players. And all of them start helping each other all the time and rezzing one another. In the 6 months since Guild Wars 2 has been out, I have never once seen someone die in the game and another player not run up and save them. And that's something you would never see in most other MMOs. And it's a really interesting shift just in that small change in gameplay. All players can get rewards that are shared. We talked about this earlier. If anyone attacks a creature, everybody can get experience for it. All players can share creature rewards, as discussed earlier. So that's a big one. All players can share interactions in the world. So in a traditional MMO, let's say there's ore nodes, and you go up to the ore node and you want to get ore from them and you hammer on them, or farming or trees you can chop down. One of the really interesting things about this in Guild Wars 2 is everyone can do that. And we created our own instance versions of them, or versions on your screen that you can see that no one else can see. So if there's a tree there, I see the tree, you see the tree, I go up and chop it down and get the rewards from it. On your screen, the tree is still there. And you can go up and get credit for it as well. And we designed this so everyone can take advantage of those objects in the world. In a traditional MMO, one of the things that we found is people race as fast as they can against each other to try to get that stuff. And what it means is the first person who gets there gets it, and players are competing against each other. They're not excited to see other players. Another player in the area is going to ruin your experience because they're going to steal stuff from you. And in Guild Wars 2, you can go up and get that. Now, it's interesting. It comes with a drawback, which is on my screen, I see something different than yours. However, what we've seen gameplay-wise is people really don't seem to mind that. They greatly prefer the fact that they can get credit for that content. All players have support abilities to help other players around them. So everyone in the game can heal themselves. Everyone in the game has abilities they can use that help other players and buff other players. And they have the ability to swap to skills that support all the other people around them. And with that ability, it means that people are constantly supporting each other because it's built directly into the skills that they have. It's not a specific profession that one group has. Everyone can do it. And so you start to view other players always as a support in our game. And then I talked a little bit about this already, but we reward the things that we want people to do. Traditionally, games there's really kind of two ways that you can force people to do things. You can penalize them for doing things you don't want them to do, or you can encourage them to do the things that you want to do with rewards. And what we found is traditionally, if you encourage someone and reward them for doing the things that you want them to do, they enjoy it a lot more than if you punish them for things that you don't want them to do. So things like every time you res, your character earns experience. Every time you help another player, you get rewards for it. Those are things that we did to encourage people to help other players. And we've seen it works really well. Players are constantly helping each other in our game. And it's because the game is rewarding them for doing it. So the last sort of sub-feature of open world is rules for player action consequences. So these are the rules for consequences that players have in the world. So traditionally, you get a quest, you go do the quest, you come back and get your reward, and nothing in the world changes because you did it. Because 2 minutes later, somebody else needs to be able to come along, accept the quest, and they need to be able to do it as well. Because there are hundreds of players running around in the map at the same time. And so everyone needs to be able to do this content. Some games recently have added a new feature. They call it phasing or hidden content, where in certain areas, the whole quest, each part of the quest is visible differently to each player who's on it. The problem with that is you're not all playing together. You're playing basically next to each other where you can't see any of the other players. And so the world changes for you, but everybody else could be standing right next to you. You can't see them, and they can only see their content that's there. So we checked, does this pass our pillar test if we were to keep the game like this? And not only does it not pass the community test, It also didn't pass a second pillar, which is the living world test of the world is alive. There's a sense of realism. The world changes based on players' actions. In the traditional MMO system, your actions don't change the world for anybody else because it can't, because they don't want to ruin the experience for other players. And so we set out to develop a system where everybody could change the world together. So there's your answer. It didn't really work. Puppy couldn't get out of the tub. So what could we come up with to improve those systems? The first thing we discussed is having all quest content in the game be phased to give the perception of having a consequence. And we basically said we could modify the existing system. And we threw that out pretty quickly. We decided that that wasn't going to work for us because phasing basically was just a workaround for the problem. It wasn't players playing together. It was faking the world consequence to put players next to each other who couldn't see each other. And then our next answer was, could we design a core content system that replaces quests where players' combined actions affect the world and have a direct consequence on the world? And we decided, let's give it a shot. Let's throw out quests. Let's say our game doesn't have quests at all. What system can we come up with that replaces them, that encourages everybody to quest together, and the outcome of the quest affects the world for everyone? And that led us to developing a new feature that we had never planned to build, which was our dynamic event system, or our primary content delivery system for the game. So what is a content delivery system? It is a system that basically players will have content in the world that provides them a relevant experience, goals to complete, narrative, and a strong reward. So quests have done that. And the game, through the UI and communication systems in the game, provides messages to you as the player to tell you about the content that is available for you to do. So those are the core systems that we had to make sure that whatever we developed also had. So we really wanted to go with more of this event-based model so everyone could take place and participate in the content. But that created a lot of challenges that we needed to overcome. So we needed to figure out, how are players going to join in this content? The traditional model was to walk up to an NPC and accept a quest, but that wasn't going to work for us because we wanted everybody to be able to do it. We needed to figure out how to size the content. So in a traditional quest, there's basically a number of players required to do it. And that number doesn't ever change. And to do the content, you have to get enough people together to defeat that quest. Most quests take one person. Some of them take 3 or 5 or more. But we wanted to make a system where if 5 people were there, you could play it. If 10 people were there, you could play it. If 15 more people ran in halfway through, it would still work. We needed to have the content affect the world because that was our living world pillar of the game, and we needed to make sure that that stayed true. And it needed to do it for all the players in the world to give the sense that the world was alive. And then we needed to solve the reward issue, but we had already solved that earlier, which was basically we just give credit to everybody if they help out on content. And we wanted to do the same thing with this system. Anyone who participated in our quest system, our event system, would get rewards for it regardless. So we just carried that reward system for killing creatures right over into our event system as well. So the first thing we needed to solve was, how do you join our new content system, our event system? And we wanted to remove the idea of talking to an NPC to begin it. So what did we do? We made it so that content is always available, and as soon as you walk into the radius, you are participating in the event. The event information pops up on screen, and you can see what's going on. It gives a sense of immediacy, and you see it in the world. But it creates new challenges. Because you don't have a quest NPC that you talk to that sends you off to a specific place in the world, we didn't have anything in the world to lead you to these events. They just happened in a place, and we needed something to get you there. We was going to create a stronger reliance on voiceover, VO, and visually showing what was going on, because there wasn't a guy you could go talk to at the start of the quest who told you about the storyline you were about to see. You were going to experience that storyline in the world live in front of you. And we needed to figure out, how do we communicate to players what the story is and what the things they're going to experience are. And because of that, we need to optionally find other ways for people to get the story if they wanted to know more about what was going on. All right, so we needed to figure out how to size the content. So we needed to have a system to dynamically change the difficulty based on player participation to scale to varying player numbers. So what we did is we built a dynamic scaling system for our content system. As more players arrive in the area and participate in the event, the game tracks them and changes difficulty accordingly. So if 5 players show up, the event actually starts generating more creatures for them to fight and starts changing the levels of the creatures to make them more difficult. If there's one boss there, it starts improving the stats of the boss in the background to make it more difficult. and it actually starts giving them new skills to deal with more players as more people show up. And we needed to do this across all of the content in our game. This created some issues like, how do we scale different goals? How do we scale the kill boss objective? How do we scale defending a target? How do we scale collecting objects? All the things that you would find in a traditional quest. And so with each one of these, we had to make unique rules for each specific type of event. So for killing a boss, we made their health go up as more players showed up. And if people left, the health went back down in the background. They never lost how much damage that they had taken, but the remaining pool of health they had left would change based on the number of players that participated. If you were defending an NPC or defending a friend, we would make it so that the waves of enemies that came in got bigger and bigger, and they got more and more health, and they got more and more levels to offset the number of players that are there. For collection events, what we did is we simply took the number of players that were in the area, and we multiplied the number of items needed by the number of players. So it just scaled up, and as players left, it actually would count back down for the number of items required. And it would never force content to automatically complete if it scaled back down. It would instead stop it at the last point it was at, and then the remainder would require the new number of people that was there. So we also had to solve another issue. What happens if people leave the area? Most of the events, we set up rules to allow them to scale back down so that it wasn't a problem if people left. And then the last one is it created an extremely large testing workload. So in a traditional quest, when you wanted to test it, you got one person, you ran the quest, you made sure it worked, and you're done. With our event system, you needed to test it with one person. You needed to test it with 3 people. You needed to test it with 5, 10, 15, 20. And we really didn't find a great solution for that yet. We do some automation testing for it, but for the most part, it's just a lot of work. And I feel very sorry for our QA testing team because we have put that workload on them with this decision. So we have a very large testing team as a result. This is one thing we really didn't find a good way to make this process way easier. But the benefit of it is we have a really strong system. The downside is it takes a lot more work to test than the traditional quest system. So this is one of the things that happened based on the decisions that we made. And it affects our company every day and the costs of how many people we hire for QA and the staff that we need to have to do that. So just something that you always need to keep in the back of your head. Anytime you make a decision on a feature, those can have effects like that. And we chose to be OK with that. So I'm going to jump back for a second, and I'm going to talk about now what we did to fix joining primary content and the issues there. So I talked a little bit earlier about how do we get people to these events. We now know that they scale up if more people are there. The number of people that are there affects the content, but we don't have anything in our game like a traditional quest that says go over here. So we invented a couple different systems for this. One of them is we added a system that made effects draw way further in the map so you could see them anywhere in the map, and we tied that to specific events. So if bandits came and they blew up the pump house, we would put, or the water station, we would put an effect on it so you could see the explosion from anywhere on the map if you could look over to that area. And it draws you and makes you run to that location if you see that effect going off in the world. We also created a new type of NPC that we called criers. And these are characters who would find your character in the game, run up to them, and in voice text tell you something's going wrong, something horrible is going on in the world. And if you talk to them, they would tell you exactly where it is. They would track the event for you and show you that. And what we found is this actually is much more immersive. The world comes out and finds you and tells you where content is going on. And so if you're exploring and you're running around, suddenly somebody will run up to you and say, my farm's on fire, or our house is being attacked. And it's really more like real life, right? There's people asking you for help, and you go find them. And this fit very well into the content system of what we were trying to develop. For people who are still looking for that story element, there were some people who said, I really want that wall of text that tells me everything about this storyline. What we did is we actually added story to all of the main event characters in the world. The person whose farm was under attack, or the person who lived in a town that needed your help. And if you went up and talked to them, you actually could get all of the lore and all of the story that you could have got from a traditional quest if you wanted to get it. But what we found is hardly any players cared about it anymore. They wanted to experience it in the world instead, which is fine. And then we had to record a lot of VO, tons of voiceover, so that characters in the world are always telling you what's going on. If their farm is under attack and you're there helping them, they're going to start shouting, there's people coming from the east, there's enemies coming from the west, my hay is burning, help put out the fires. And all of that requires us recording VO. So that also was a decision that we made that was going to be very expensive dollar-wise. We ended up recording over 60 feature films of voice dialogue for the game to make sure that everywhere you went, you heard people talking. And we felt that hit our pillars the best for providing the best possible living world experience that we could. All right, so the next thing that we had to deal with was how do we have this content, these events, affect the world once players are done participating in them? In a traditional quest, when the quest ends, nothing happens. But we wanted to make the world change. So we needed a system where content could directly affect the world for players. However, this couldn't be a permanent change because the content would be consumed too quickly. If, for example, we put 100 events in the game, and when you finished an event, it was gone forever, and that was it, and it permanently changed the world, we would have run out of content in about 15 minutes the day the game launched, and there would have been nothing left for people to play. So we had to figure out a solution for that while still giving sort of the perception that the world is changing around you from this content. So what we did is we gave our events timers and conditions that set up the rules of when they happen in the world. And we allowed them to have an effect on the world that would persist until something else came along to change them. So for example, if the farm burned down in the world and the players weren't there to save it, and this is an interesting point about events, is they happen whether players are there or not, so you can show up in the middle of an event. If the farm burns down, the way the farm comes back is a new event happens in the world that lets you rebuild it. So the changes aren't permanent, but the changes persist until the players or enemies do something to change them again. So what issues does this system create? It helps with the sense of the world changing and feeling alive, but it doesn't give an ultimate sense of every single thing that happens has permanence. This is something that we really don't have a great answer for. One of the things that we're starting to do now with the game is we're actually layering in each month storylines that do happen once and go away to sort of complement the things that we have on rotating schedules, to give this sense that the world is permanently changing along with the stuff that isn't as much. It requires far more content density due to the timers that change the content that's available. So picture a typical role-playing game. You walk into a town, there's 10 guys standing there with quests, and the guys and gals in the town will offer you the quests. They're always there for you to do. You go off, you do it, and you come back. And as a game designer, you know I can guarantee people will do all 10 of those quests as long as they find them, and I now have 3 hours of their attention, or 3 hours of gameplay covered for those 10 quests. Well, in Guild Wars 2, you could walk into that town, and there could be no events going on. You could walk in and there could be 7 events going on around the town. All 10 could be going on. We don't really know because they're all on different timers that are rotating with each other, so it feels like they happen and they go away for a while. So what that means is the amount of content that we need to generate to ensure players have 3 hours of gameplay experience suddenly goes up exponentially because we don't know for sure what they're going to witness. So instead of building 3 hours of gameplay, we have to build 9 hours of gameplay to offset the fact that they won't actually necessarily see everything. That is another trade-off that we felt was worthwhile and fit the pillars of what our game was. But that's a lot of cost for what we're trying to do. So that was a cost we chose to go with, but it was one of the trade-offs of this decision. And then the last one is, obviously, the events can't all affect the world in major ways. So we can't have every town get burnt down. We can't have every pump house get destroyed, or it's going to feel kind of silly, right? Every single thing in the world gets blown up constantly. It's not a world I want to live in. And so we had a lot of the events have more subtle changes to the world. And so there were little events that we built, like you would help a guy go get ore to craft weapons. And at the end of the event, he would walk across the map and go back to his forge, and he would actually hammer on the forge, build the weapons, and then sell them to players. And one of the things that we've run into is a few players who understand the world and get it will follow the guy back and see what he does. A lot of players, if it doesn't immediately change the world the second the event is done, all run off to go find the next thing. And so we have a lot of subtle world change built into all the content that a lot of our players just don't notice. And so we've been trying to build a lot of things like voice dialogue onto our characters to tell you that they're about to go do something, or building directly into the event UI, messaging letting you know that something is going to happen afterwards. But it's still an issue because we don't want to blow up everything. We will have some little nuanced stuff that sometimes people don't feel like the events actually do change the world, when often they will. So this led to our dynamic event system. Basically, this was our replacement. We took quests. We said we're not going to have quests. Instead, we're going to have events. And this was really an aha moment for us. This was, our minds were blown. Dynamic events became the primary content model for Guild Wars 2. Everything we did in the game revolved around these. When we went to go build dungeons, instead of building traditional dungeons where you just progress all the way through them, we built them using events. And we started layering in random events in some of the dungeons so that there was randomization inside of the events. We built different paths that you could go on in each of the dungeons based on these concepts of events. And then when the game went live, we continued to expand on that. So some of the things that we've done is we've had holiday festivals in the game. And these are festivals that last for a couple weeks. We did Halloween, where he celebrated in the world, and we had a big boss named the Mad King who showed up. And there were events specific to him that lasted for a couple weeks where you could go fight against him, where Halloween decorations appeared all over the world, where there are pumpkins you can carve, where there were new event content that you can experience. This event tool has really allowed us to sort of set the stage for what our game is going to be. And then each month we're finding new ways to innovate on that and build forward. In a couple days, we're adding a new system we're calling our guild mission system to our game. And guilds are actually communities in our game banding together. And this system allows those guilds to actually go into the game and create events at specific locations that everyone gets to experience. And so the event system has basically allowed us to create sort of an entry-level player-created content system in our game. And the capacity for that in the long run is incredible for the ability to let players create their own events or create content in our world. And we're really just kind of scratching the surface of that. But this is an example of one feature that we thought of that we were just going to use to replace quests has grown into more and more a bigger system that's defining where our game is going as a live launched game. Another thing that we've done recently, and I talked a little bit about this earlier, is trying to take the events and adding some that are permanent, things that they happen, they change the world, and then they won't ever run again, so that it makes the events that don't happen quite as often, or the events that rotate in the world, feel like it's not as big of a deal because there are events that are permanent, and they all complement each other to make the world feel more alive. So we have basically the story of the game each month is continuing, and we're using the event system to do that. And the story plays out, and then it changes the world, and then the next story begins. And the event system has allowed us to do that as well. We use the event system in PvP. So in our world versus world PvP, for example, which is hundreds of players running around fighting against each other, and they're fighting for controls of castles and keeps and trying to hold this big battleground, events are used to dictate each part of that battle. There are events to take control of castles, events to take over keeps. There are events to take over supply camps. And then when you hold the supply camp, it actually sends a caravan with supplies to the castles and the keeps. And if they make it there and you escort the event creates supply at that place that people can then use to build siege weapons and defend the castle and build walls. And suddenly this system that we thought of that was supposed to be a very simple PvE system was now appearing in PvP in our game as well, and is one of the key features of our world versus world PvP system. This is a great example of when you try to push the boundaries on what you can do with a feature, sometimes you end up with something that is so much more than what you ever realized it could be. And we definitely had that with Guild Wars 2. So some of the other things that we've done with the game that don't directly tie to the two sort of core features, living world and the shared experience and events that I talked about, I want to just give you some examples of some other areas that we chose to innovate in the game where we use that pillar of community and we compared it to a decision we were making to come up with a final answer. So in combat in our game, we asked ourselves, is there anything we can do in combat that would help create a sense of community between our players? And one of the things that we decided is, let's try having a combo system where players physically can put down objects in the world, or things that they can interact with, and other players can interact with those and combo off of them. It's almost like an old school fighting game type thought, except we put objects in the world. So for example, if somebody puts down a wall of fire in our game, a ranger could come up, they can shoot arrows through the wall of fire, the arrows catch on fire, and if they hit a target, light them on fire. And so players start comboing together, and we see players put down a wall of fire, and then somebody will put down an electrical field behind that, and somebody will shoot through it, and their bullet will catch on fire and hit the electrical field and become charged and hit someone. And suddenly, our players are now looking at each other. They're putting down objects and moving together, and they're paying attention to what one another are doing. And it's a very subtle change as well, but it drastically changes the way that people view other players in the game. We have no dedicated healing class. We decided to, some people like to call this the holy trinity of healers, tanks, and DPS. And one of the traditional things that happens in a MMORPG, or a massively online role-playing game, is if you want to get a group together and do content, you usually have to have some people who are healers, you need to have some people who are tanks or warriors, and you need to have some people who are sort of damage dealers or mages or anything that falls in that category. And the three of them play off one another so that you can complete content. This is an interesting community tool. It forces players to play together to get content, but it also creates a problem, which is people can't do content unless the exact right people are online. So anyone who's played one of those games knows that moment where you're sitting around for 20 or 30 minutes and you're asking yourself, I need a healer, we need a healer, we can't do this until we get a healer. And everybody wants a healer. And then some people get stuck playing as the healer and they really don't want to be the healer, but it's the only way you can do the content. And we felt like for us that that was a restriction to community as opposed to something that allowed community to play together. So we wanted to get rid of that. So every profession in Guild Wars 2 can heal itself. Every profession has skills that they can use to support other players. Every profession has skills that they can use to basically help other players out in the way that they play. And what we've seen since the game launched is basically you never find yourself waiting around for any specific profession. Everybody just says, we want to go do this content. They join up and they play. And it's really interesting to see the change in psychology that comes along with that, where suddenly all these players are able to play the game easier. There's no waiting to have fun, as we like to call it, where you're sitting around waiting for your group to form. Another small change that we made to combat is projectiles fly on a path. So in a lot of traditional MMOs, and we had this in our first Guild Wars game, when a projectile would shoot at somebody, it would basically track until it hit them, or it would only launch at that target. And what that means is other players don't need to pay attention to that. Other players can't help you. We made it so every projectile, more like an action game, shoots on a path. If an arrow is shooting at you, another player can run up and stand in front of it and they get hit. They can put up a shield and block it. They can put down a reflecting wall and bounce the arrow back at the person who did it. And so suddenly, players are working together on positioning and using skills to support each other. And it's another very subtle change, but it makes a big difference if players understand how all of it works. Some of the social changes that we made to the game. Traditionally, you can only belong to one guild in the game. And a guild is basically a player community. Think of it like your Facebook, where you have your community. We wanted to let people belong to as many different communities as they felt like, and then they could represent whichever one they felt like playing with that day. And so what it meant was you could have all sorts of different communities in the game. And so if there was a guild who was really into PvP, you could go play with them one day. If you have another guild that is your friends who only play on weekends, you then swap over and play with them. And so it allows players to start feeling like they're a part of more diverse and different communities, and they have different groups to play with. And then I talked a little bit about the guild mission system. This is another thing that we added so that guilds and communities can all get together and they can all go do content together. So let's look at some examples in other games. I think that this is always really interesting. You guys got a chance to hear a lot about Guild Wars 2. What are some of the things that other games have done or are going to be doing shortly that also are building on this pillar of community? SimCity, the new SimCity game, has a really interesting mechanic that they're doing with it, which is basically you have your city that you're building, and all the cities around you actually contribute to your city. You build trade routes with them. You build stuff that interacts with your city, and those cities are all controlled by other players. And so it builds this community between all the players who have cities next to each other and changes the way fundamentally you play this game that for decades now we've all been playing SimCity. Suddenly now it's this social community-driven environment. Tryon is trying something really unique. They're putting out a game soon that has a TV show telling a story simultaneously with a story that's going on in the game. And so the thought is they're going to have a community following the TV show. They're going to have a community following the game. And those communities are going to start melding together. And they're going to start working together to try to figure out what's the plot of the show, what's the plot playing out in the game, how do we experience the content. And it's a really unique idea about changing the way that people view video game and TV show communities and trying to bring those together. So that's another one that's coming out soon. It'll be interesting to see how that works. There's a lot of games that have required shared resources between players. This is particularly popular on Facebook games. So Farmville is an example of this. You almost are encouraged to make everyone you know play Farmville because it helps you be better at Farmville. And it's brilliant and devious all at the same time. Everyone you know is a potential candidate to make your farm bigger, and you're always harassing them and trying to get them to come in and help you out. And so this is something that a lot of social games in particular have experimented with. And whether you like it or not, Farmville had over 75 million players, and I think that this played a huge part in that being the case. So that's an interesting example of how powerful tools like this can be. There are games that are building editors that basically allow the players to build the content. And there's some that have done this already. The original Neverwinter, Little Big Planet is another example of this, where it actually builds communities based on the players building the experience and offering it up to the entire player community. You have mods that work this way. So Dota, which has inspired League of Legends, which is currently the biggest game in the world, came from players being able to use a game building tool from World of Warcraft. And they used that, and they built a community around it. And now here we have, or not World of Warcraft, Warcraft, excuse me. And from all of that, here we have this game that inspired another game. And Dota 2 and League of Legends combined has basically grown out of a community driven by players. And who knows what the future holds for this concept. I think player-created content is a really interesting future for the industry. It's a challenge for us for MMOs of how do we constantly make enough content that everybody can keep up with. And player-created content is one way that you can constantly generate content and everyone can experience it. So what are some more community concepts that have been done? Esports commentating has built communities. I talked about League of Legends as a great example of this. There are people who literally have full-time jobs that, much like guys who are broadcasting football games, we now have full-time sports broadcasters for esports. And they watch League of Legends games all day long and commentate on them and stream them on the internet. And they are extremely popular and they have huge followings. And they build communities around these games and around these players. You have landing pages where there's an entire community based around the esports part of these games. And you have player highlight websites where you can go and you can read about the famous players on these games. And those players have communities built around them that drive the game to even further heights. I think there is no better example of this than League of Legends right now. I think I don't know how many of you saw the footage of this, but one of the championships for League of Legends in Taiwan was in a stadium of over 20,000 people, completely sold out to watch people play a video game. That's crazy. And 10 years ago, there's no way that happens. In Korea, people go to stadiums, and there are TV channels dedicated to StarCraft. And that is talk about a great way to build a community for your game. Social media integration is another really interesting way that we're starting to see that type of content going on in games. People who are able to, inside of a game, link to Facebook and say, I just completed this, I just did this, and your friends can see it and they can comment on it and vote you down or vote you up for completing things in the game. And there's more and more of that social integration that is getting built directly into games now. We have a lot of gaming platforms that have shared community messaging. Especially in the States, Xbox has gotten to be really big. And I think that one of the major reasons for this is because you have a community in Xbox, and everything you do is earning you Xbox points. And you have achievements, and you have all these things, and all your friends can see them. And so you're constantly competing against your friends for achievement points, and you can see the stuff that they're doing. Steam is another great example of this as a platform for games that go out there, where you can see when your friends get online. You can see what game they logged into. And every time that little pop-up comes up that tells you about something one of your friends is doing, it makes you want to go play that game. You see that your friend is playing a game, and maybe you wouldn't have played it, but because that message pops up, you decide, oh, I'm going to go check that game out. And suddenly, they're building a stronger community because of that, just from small little pop-up messaging within Steam. You can form a rock band. This is more of a social community, but I don't know how big this is here, but one of the things I've seen that's started happening in the US is people go to bars now, and they play rock band at bars, and they perform for one another like a real band. And you want to talk about ridiculous community building. It's really entertaining, by the way. If you ever get a chance, check it out at least once. You may not ever want to go back, but at least check it out once. It's pretty good stuff. And here is a game that basically is formulated entirely on a community. You have to go find people to play it with you. You have to make a band. You want to because you don't have a bass player, and what band is great without the bass player and the guitar player and the drummer. And so they put a social pressure on you to want to get your friends together and play all of that together. And it's a really unique experience. And then out of that has grown this idea of going out and performing and getting your band live. This is kind of an interesting story that doesn't have a lot to do with community. But one of the guys who works at ArenaNet got so big into Rock Band and playing with people, he went out and bought drums. And now he's a drummer. And he's actually getting into a bunch of bands as a direct result of Rock Band. So I always thought that was interesting. And then the final one that you're seeing a lot, and this is pretty common, is refer a friend bonuses. And these are bonuses that both parties get for bringing a friend into a game. I think World of Warcraft has been one of the most aggressive in this area, where literally they'll do things like, you get a max level character if you can get your friend to come play the game, or you can get the game for free for a while if you bring a friend in. And these are really strong elements that make you want to go out and convince your friend to play a game. And these are fantastic community building elements to get more people in and check them out. And we're starting to see more and more of this across the gaming industry now as well. So all of those are decisions that were based in pillar-based design for your game. For us, pillars led us down a lot of paths. It led to the creation of the dynamic event system. It led to the creation of a lot of the compelling elements that make Guild Wars 2 what it is. It led to the creation of a lot of the systems I just talked about in other games, and whole innovation on games like SimCity that are really taking a pillar like community and building a whole game around that. And so the message I would hope that you guys all take away from this, and especially those of you who are going to go on and make games or be game developers, is that that very beginning phase, when you consider the pillar of your game, when you consider what are the foundations that this game is based on, that is the most important time in the process of your game, because that will define everything you do. For 5 straight years on Guild Wars, that defined every decision we made. It defined everything that we did. And it defined basically the game that we have today because of those pillars that we stuck with and made our game from. So, on a final note, I just want to say thank you very much to everybody at SINFO for having me here, and say a special thank you to Pedro and Hugo for having us and providing a great tour of the city of Lisbon and being fantastic hosts. And thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Quem estiver perguntas a fazer, levante o braço e nós vamos tentar passar o microfone o mais rápido possível.
Okay. First of all, welcome to Portugal, and I really enjoyed your speech.
Thank you.
I have a lot of questions, but I'll just ask the main one. Having played through Guild Wars 2 and trying to decompose all the design decisions that appear there, one thing came to mind. Basically, the Skinner box effect is present, but in the minimal sense of the of that effect. I keep finding myself coming back to the game because I want to feel entertained, and not because I feel like I need to play it. And all of that comes through your design decisions or the team's decisions. And my question is, which came first, the free-to-play or the design decisions?
For us, actually, the decision to make the game not have a monthly fee was the very first decision we made after we decided to make Guild Wars 2. So in Guild Wars 1, we never had a monthly fee for the game. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's very typical for, especially when Guild Wars 1 came out 7 years ago, it was very typical for online games, especially MMORPGs, to charge a monthly fee for the game. And that was a model we didn't want to have. We felt like it kind of held your players hostage, and we wanted to be able to not do that and provide a unique experience. So yeah, for Guild Wars 2, that was probably in the first 10 minutes when we said, let's make Guild Wars 2, we just all said, yeah, let's just do that, and we didn't worry about it again.
As a two-parter, sorry, how easy did that make to give perspective to those decisions that you made?
It makes a huge difference. I think that thought process, you mentioned a Skinner box, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with that concept. It's basically the idea that you put a carrot in front of somebody and they're chasing after it and they get it, and then you put the next one. And it's sort of this endless loop of, here's the next goal you're going to get people to chase after it, and they never get off the loop. It's actually, a lot of that is based in sort of habit formed, trying to get your players to form habits and become, really no better way to put this, to become addicted to something. A Skinner box very much is a tool to do that. And so for Guild Wars 2, I think we've tried really hard to not do that with our game. I think it's a fundamental feature that you're seeing in more and more games now, to get people to log back in as often as they possibly can. And so it did affect our design decisions, in that what we decided to do with the game is instead provide really compelling experiences, and every month add as much content as we could through the event system. So the reason that you want to come play our game is because of all the new things you can experience, as opposed to sort of Skinner boxes that are telling you, come back and chase this, and come back and chase this reward.
Hello, Colin.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. I have a question about thinking about, for example, when we were talking about ending the Holy Trinity. How do you guys? Well, we will take this path. We're gonna remove all the tanks and healers and give healing seals to all classes. But do you guys think, like, in the future we might, don't know, bring some NPCs to heal or change depending on what's going on with the community? How do you guys think on that, the process?
Well, usually the process that we do for any time that we want to change a feature is we start by looking at every other genre of games that is out there and say, is there another genre that's already solved this problem outside of our own? And so the concept of not having a holy trinity, or of that people having to be a healer or having to be a damage dealer or having to be a frontline character, that was born out of, actually, we looked at first-person shooters. And we said, well, in a first-person shooter, you don't need to have a medic, and you don't need to have a guy who runs around in body armor, and you don't need to have a guy with a gun. Basically, you pick up a rocket launcher, and now you're a guy with a rocket launcher, and it doesn't matter. That's what you play. You pick up a shotgun, that's what you play. The game is all about using the weapons that you find in the game and experiencing them. And so characters aren't reliant on one another. They're self-reliant, and they have the ability to help one another in a first-person shooter. And so it was just kind of obvious to us once we saw that. We said, well, there's no reason that our game can't play more like that, play more like an action game or a first-person shooter, where there aren't systems where players are mandatorily required to support one another. Instead, they're self-sufficient, and then they can help one another as well. So that's where a big part of that came out of, was just looking at other games that are out there. Certainly, the idea of having an NPC follow you around is another way we could have gone to solve that. There's a lot of different paths. I think that's one of the really interesting things about game design, is you guys could, every one of you could form a game design team, and you could all sit down and look at the same problems that we came up with, and you might all come up with completely different answers. And many of you might come up with way better answers than the ones that we came up with. I think that's just one of the really interesting things that comes out of game development, is what do you find to solve these problems? And as long as you know what your pillars are, you end up finding really interesting ways to solve those. No.
Hi. Here.
Hello.
So first of all, I'd like to say I'd like to thank you for this speech. You're a very good speaker. Thank you very much. I'd like also to welcome also to Portugal. I hope you like your stay around here. My question is, with the communities, people do what we call the Let's Play in YouTube. Mm-hmm. So YouTube celebrities do publicity of your game. Mm-hmm. How do you manage with them? For example, let's take the Yogscast, for example. Mm-hmm. They publicitate games like Portal 2 or Minecraft, and Notch did an event, Minecon. What do you do with persons like that?
How do we get them basically to look at our game? So that's one of the advantages of having a big publisher, is they do a lot of that stuff and provide support for us. So ArenaNet is our company that built Guild Wars. NCSoft is our publisher. And think of it sort of like if you're making a movie. There's a crew who makes the movie, and then Warner Brothers puts out the movie for you, and they do all the marketing. They get it in studios. They do all of that work to make that happen. And so for us, NCSoft is the group that effectively does that for us. They have a whole PR department that takes our game, and they work with all of the major media. They have contacts with them. They know them well. And they talk to them about it, and they send them information and encourage them to come be involved. And so that's a big part of what we do. Christian over here is with NCSoft PR, so Christian makes a lot of that happen. Thanks, Christian. And that's something that having a big publisher can allow you to do. If you're a smaller indie developer, it's much harder to do that. It's definitely something where you need to get out to game shows. You need to try to get those people excited, contact them constantly, and be relentless in letting them know about the games that you make until they want to come check it out. One thing that really kind of relates back to what I talked about earlier is if you have really strong pillars for your game, it's very, very easy for your publisher to take that information and use it to present to people and to get people excited about it. So, for example, the guys like Yogscast, when we talk to them, we say, these are the key features of our game, this living world, this dynamic event system that changes the world all the time, this sense of community that's pervasive across the game. And when you have those as pillars and you can present that as the thing that makes your game unique, it's much more compelling to them. And that's a reason they want to check it out and they want to go see what you're providing. And so that decision that we made way early on affected our ability to get those guys to come look at the game because we really had clearly defined pillars.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi. This is a gameplay question. When you said that for multiple players to get experience from a single enemy, I popped the idea that imagine that many players are hitting a really tough enemy, and you only can get the bonus, the experience, if you get 5% health of the enemy.
Yeah.
If more than 20 players attacked the enemy, there's going to be at least some that attacked and didn't get. Did I understand wrong, or it's that what's going to?
So that's correct. So what we've had to do actually is build additional rules for that as well and expand on that. So that's a really interesting point. So we found two things: is one, regular creatures in the world. If 20 people are attacking them, they die so fast that there's no way 20 people can ever hit them. So our scaling system for events makes it so it creates all these extra creatures. So it kind of spreads players out so that they're fighting different creatures. So you never end up with 20 people trying to hit one at once. Instead, we're sending 7 or 8 creatures at them and then 8 from another direction. So we avoid that problem that way. The only exception to that is bosses, right? There's a really big boss. There's a big ogre stomping around or a giant. And we don't want to put 20 of them on the screen or you can't see anything. So we put one of them up there. But we can't have the same contribution rules for those guys. So we actually have custom rules for creatures that are larger or have a lot more health. And we make it so far more players can get credit for them. And even in that system, we found it actually wasn't friendly enough to players. And so we have a patch going out in a couple days that makes it even easier for players to get credit for fighting those big bosses. That is definitely one of the challenges of going with that system. Yeah.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank you for the great game that you did.
Thank you.
It's great. The design of Tyria is just wonderful. But there's something on my mind that worries me. That is, throughout the levels, the diversity of armors, of weapons, and even of skills. Because having 5 skills, that is usually what you end up using, it's great. But from level 5 to level 80, having those same skills, at the end it gets kind of boring. And what I want to ask is, why not make more armors, make more weapons, make shiny things, more other than legendary, of course? Because you end up using heavy armor for warrior, for guardian, and that's it, I think. And you have much. It's always the same. I'm making myself clear.
Yeah, it's a good question. We're actually building many more right now. Somewhere in Seattle, Washington, there are many artists drawing armors and weapons right now to just keep getting more and more of those in the game. So hopefully there'll be some really exciting stuff in the future that you'll want more of. On the skill front, it's a really interesting question. It's a balance of how approachable your game is versus depth. And I think for me, the best games, when you want to be really popular as a video game, you need to have a game that's extremely approachable. It's very easy for casual players to pick it up, learn how to play it, and understand what's going on. Because then you can get a whole large audience. And then you need to have a lot of depth as you progress through the game that makes the game change and has new systems for you to learn, or else you can't keep those people playing as they go all the way through it. They lose interest eventually. So the weapon system in Guild Wars 2 is set up to be very simple to understand. If you're using a bow, you have skills that come with a bow. If you're using a hammer works the same way always, so that a new player can learn that and understand how the game works. And then the depth comes in, and we have other systems like our trait system that's supposed to change up the way you play and change the weapons that you use. As you get higher level in the game, we actually let you change weapons in combat. So you can go from a bow to a hammer in mid-combat and suddenly change the way that your character works. And each of those pieces is intended to add that layer of depth as we go through. But certainly we're going to keep exploring with other ideas to actually add even more depth to the game towards the end of the game for players even looking for more change and more experience out of it. And I think that's something that's really important to have for anyone who's making a game, is you want to have it be as casual friendly as possible and as deep as you can for people looking for that experience. Yeah.
As an aspiring game developer, I find it hard to... I'm here.
Hey.
As an aspiring game developer, I find it hard to stay away from the predatory development practices from games like Farmville and that kind of social experience. Do you think there should be measures that we implement as a maturing industry to stop this kind of behavior, or do you think it's okay and it's just a fad that will disappear in a while?
Well, I don't think it's a fad that's going to disappear. I think it uses basic human psychology to drive people to make decisions, and I think that there's a large amount of basically subconsciously you're getting people to do things whether they realize it or not. And I think that you're seeing it everywhere, right? You're seeing it in marketing, you're seeing it in business. I guarantee you, if one of you has a loyalty card to a grocery store or a retail chain, they use that information to learn everything about who you are as a customer. And they use that information to help determine what coupons they're going to send you in the mail. And they use that based on your buying habits to decide these coupons are things that you might be interested in buying based on the things you bought in the past. Let's send those to someone, and it brings a higher chance that you're going to go back to their store. And it plays on that same sort of basic human psychology. And so I don't think that's going to go away. I do think it's interesting that games like Farmville, for example, got really, really popular, but are far less popular now than they used to be. And I think some of that is that style of game. It was very obvious to people what some of those systems were, and I think they were able to see through that and recognize it eventually. And some people just don't enjoy that. But for the perspective of that changing, I don't think the industry will change. I think if anything, a lot of it is going to head more towards that. What I would say is morally, it's a decision that you have to make. What is most important to you? Certainly in Guild Wars, we have some elements like that. It's something where you need to have enough to get people to want to play your game. But at the same time, you want to motivate them the ways that make the most sense for you. For us, the things that motivate people the best is providing them with an amazing experience every month and providing them with as much content as we can. And basically, like, if we're Disneyland, we want to open a new ride every month that you can go on. So that's the reason you come back. So that's what works for us. It's very different for every company and for every game. And I wouldn't try to stand up here and tell you what's right for you. You should decide for your game what you think makes the most sense. There are certainly things that you can do in either direction. And yeah, I don't see that changing. I think if anything, positions like data analysts that analyze that kind of information and make decisions, that's becoming more and more prevalent across all industries now.
Sorry, didn't sound like it was working. My question is more related to the artwork in the game. You obviously have something completely different from another games, not so cartoonish, anime, or just 3D effects. My question is more like, how did you come up with this artwork, the artists themselves? How do you do sort of selection for the people you want to work for you, to do this piece of work for you?
Yeah, really all of that goes back to one guy at ArenaNet. Daniel Dochu is our art director. He's a world-renowned artist. His art has been featured on the cover of National Geographic. It's every year it wins awards as the best art in the industry, and it goes far beyond that. It's featured in museums. It's featured everywhere, and we're extremely lucky to have him. I think one of the things that brings to our company is people want to work for him. They want to learn from him, and so we get incredibly talented artists who all come to ArenaNet to learn from Daniel. And as a result of that, we have one of the most talented art staffs I've ever seen. They are just amazing. As someone who can only draw stick figures, I'm completely blown away when I go down the hall and see the work these guys are doing. And for us, generally what we try to do is just get out of their way and let them do amazing art. We'll tell them this is what we're trying to accomplish out of the game. This is the vision we have for this area. And the thing that they draw is always more impressive than anything that we could ever think of. That we don't really need to manage that much. That art team is just phenomenal. That's not something a lot of people have. I don't have a great answer for you how you manage it if you don't have those people. But certainly, the ability to draw the best, to work with the best, is something that every company can work with. And if you ever have the chance to get someone like a Daniel, you need to jump all over that, because every person that you hire after that will be that much easier because you have someone that talented. And as a result, now our whole art department is just filled with all these incredibly talented people that are also now winning awards of their own as well.